In the Valley of Mexico, where mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky and lakes shimmered under the sun's burning eye, a city once stood that defied imagination, Tenochtitlan. It wasn't just a city. It was an empire born from prophecy, ritual, and blood. Floating upon the waters of Lake Texcoco, it gleamed like a vision pulled from the god's own dreams. Its causeways stretching across the lake like veins feeding a living heart. But this heart demanded a price. Every beating pulse within its temples, every stone laid beneath its pyramids, carried a secret the gods who had given the Aztecs power also hungered for blood. Sit back, relax, and imagine the smell of burning copal incense swirling through the air as drums echo across the plaza. Beneath the shadow of the great temple, thousands gather. Warriors painted in black and crimson stand beside priests whose hands are stained from the rituals of the day. The crowd murmurs prayers to Cuauhtlatoque, the sun, the warrior god, the devourer of hearts. They believe that if the sun is to rise again tomorrow, the blood of men must flow today. It is not cruelty, it is duty. In this world, sacrifice is not destruction, it is creation. The Aztecs saw the universe as fragile, its balance maintained only through constant offerings. Without them, the sun would fall, the crops would die, and the gods would abandon mankind. Every life taken was an act of preservation, a desperate attempt to keep chaos from swallowing the world whole. Yet behind the grandeur of these rituals lay a chilling truth. The empire itself was built on conquest, on fear and on faith, so powerful it made death seem divine. The obsidian blades, sharp as glass, caught the reflection of the sky as priests lifted them high, chanting words that merged with the sound of flutes and screams. Some captives came willingly, believing their hearts would beat forever in the heavens. Others trembled, realizing too late that they had become the bridge between mortals and gods. As the sun dipped below the horizon, its fading light bathed the temple in gold and crimson, as if the heavens themselves approved of the offering. And as night fell over Tenochtitlan, the question lingered in the smoky air, were the Aztecs keeping their gods alive? Or were their gods consuming them, one sacrifice at a time? Imagine approaching Tenochtitlan for the first time in 1450, when the Aztec Empire was at its height. The morning mist drifts low over Lake Texcoco, and through it rises a sight so astonishing that even hardened warriors stop in awe. A city floating upon water, its temples gleaming white against the blue of the lake, its causeways stretching like ribbons from the distant shore. The hum of life is everywhere. Canoes glide silently between market boats. Vendors call out in Nahuatl, and the scent of roasted maize and burning incense lingers in the damp air. This is no ordinary city. It is the beating heart of an empire of millions. Its streets are clean, its canals ordered, its plazas bursting with color and sound. To the Aztecs, it is the center of the world, the navel of creation where heaven, earth, and the underworld meet. They call it Tenochtitlan, the place where the prickly pear grows on the stone. The story of its founding is both myth and memory. Centuries before, the Mexica people wandered across the land, driven by visions and guided by a prophecy that they would build their city where they found an eagle perched upon a cactus, devouring a serpent. When they reached Lake Texcoco and saw that vision on a small, swampy island, they knew the gods had spoken. There, upon mud and reeds, they began to build the city that would command empires. With ingenious engineering, they drove wooden stakes deep into the lake bed, piling earth upon them to form solid ground. Over generations, their island grew, expanding into a marvel of urban design. Aqueducts carried fresh water from distant springs. Chinampa's floating gardens fed the people year-round. Canals became streets where canoes replaced carts, gliding beneath bridges carved with serpents and suns. Above all stood the Templo Mayor, the Great Pyramid, a twin shrine dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. From its summit, priests could see the entire valley mountains encircling the basin like the walls of a cosmic bowl. Yet even amid this splendor, the Aztecs lived with constant tension. Their gods demanded balance, and balance meant conflict. The city's beauty existed alongside its darkness. The same waters that reflected the temples also carried blood away from the altars. And in the stillness of night, as wind rippled the lake and torches flickered on the temple steps, one could almost feel the city breathing live, watching, waiting for the next heart to keep its sun from dying. The Aztecs believed they lived beneath the fifth sun, a world born from sacrifice and destined one day to die in fire. To them, the universe was not a place of peace, but a fragile balance between order and destruction. Each dawn was a victory, each sunset a reminder of how close the world stood to ending. The story of the five suns was more than myth, it was history written in blood and stone. They said the first sun perished by jaguars, the second by hurricanes, the third by fire, the fourth by flood. The fifth air survived only because the gods had offered themselves in sacrifice, leaping into flames so that the sun might rise again. In that moment, divine blood had purchased the continuation of existence. But with that sacrifice came a terrible debt. Humanity now owed the gods the same offering that had created them. To keep the sun alive, hearts had to burn, blood had to flow. It was not cruelty, was reciprocity. And so, every battle the Aztecs fought was not just for land or power, but for the survival of the cosmos. They called these wars flower wars, ritual conflicts meant to capture prisoners for the altars, to feed the hungry sun with the energy of men. For the Aztecs, war was sacred theater, the meeting place of divinity and destiny. Young warriors trained from childhood, not to kill their enemies, but to bring them alive, to offer them as vessels to the gods. The act was not seen as murder, but as transformation. When the blade of obsidian pierced a captive's chest, and his heart was lifted to the heavens, the Aztecs believed his soul joined the sun, rising each morning in golden light. This cycle of sacrifice gave meaning to every aspect of life, from farming and childbirth to governance and war. Even the emperor himself, the Tlatoani, was seen as the earthly vessel of divine will, a bridge between gods and mortals. Yet beneath this divine order lurked unease. What if the sacrifices ever stopped? What if the gods grew silent? The priests whispered that the fifth sun, like the four before it, would someday collapse, devoured by darkness. And so, every ceremony, every drop of blood, every conquered tribe was another desperate prayer to delay that inevitable night at the center of Tenochtitlan. The great temple rose above the city like a mountain of stone, its steps steep and slick from centuries of ritual. It was here that the Aztec heart found its rhythm, a steady pulse of life and death that echoed across the empire. Every festival, every sacrifice, every chant beneath the blazing sun was meant to feed this colossal altar of devotion. To stand at its base was to feel the weight of the gods pressing upon your soul. The air itself seemed to vibrate with unseen power, the scent of burning copal, thick and sweet, the pounding of drums, deep and slow, like the heartbeat of the world. Painted dancers moved in spirals, feathers glinting in gold light, their movements precise and ancient, tracing the patterns of creation. The priests, dressed in the skins of jaguars and eagles, climbed the temple steps, carrying obsidian blades that could slice through flesh like air. They sang to the gods above, to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, invoking the eternal balance between war and rain, sun and storm. For the Aztecs, these were not separate forces, but two halves of the same truth. Life could not exist without death, and beauty could not thrive without sacrifice. As the ceremony began, silence fell across the plaza. The crowd knelt. The drums ceased. From atop the temple, the high priest raised his hands to the heavens, his voice cutting through the wind like a blade. The captive's chest rose and fell, trembling beneath the priest's hand. Then the obsidian plunged down. The heart, still beating, was lifted toward the sky as the sun broke through the clouds, its rays spilling across the temple stones. The people cheered, their cries rising like thunder. To them, this was not horror, it was hope. The gods were pleased, the sun renewed. The body was rolled down the steps, where it was carried away to join the river of blood that flowed back into the earth, returning life to the soil, completing the eternal cycle. In that moment, Tenochtitlan itself seemed alive, breathing with the rhythm of its gods. The city's towers shone, its waters glimmered, and the people believed they had secured another dawn. Yet behind the chants and the triumph, a shadow lingered, the fear that one day, even this sacrifice would not be enough to keep the heavens burning. Beyond the grandeur of temples and blood-soaked ceremonies, power in the Aztec Empire was rooted in a complex hierarchy, a structure both rigid and fluid, where ambition and lineage intertwined like the threads of a finely woven tapestry. At the pinnacle stood the Tlatoani, the supreme ruler, whose voice was law, whose presence was the embodiment of divine favor. To the people, the Tlatoani was not merely a man. He was the living bridge between the mortal world and the gods themselves, his every word carrying the weight of celestial decree. But the ascent to this throne was never simple. Some researchers believe that while noble birth provided a path, merit in warfare and political acumen could elevate a man or even a woman to prominence. The Tlatoani presided over councils of nobles, each technically commanding loyalty from their own estates and calpolis, ensuring that the web of governance stretched through every corner of the city and beyond. In Tenochtitlan, the ruler's palace was a fortress and a court, adorned with vibrant murals, jade inlays, and intricately carved stone that told stories of ancestors and conquests. Here, decisions were made not only on taxes and trade, but on matters of life and death, of alliances and betrayals, where a single decree could shift the fate of thousands. The Tlatoani's authority extended outward, beyond the walls of the capital, to the distant Cuauhtlatoque that dotted the Valley of Mexico, where local rulers maintained their positions under the shadow of the Triple Alliance. The Aztec ruler commanded loyalty not just through fear, but through the careful orchestration of ritual and spectacle, demonstrating the favor of the gods with grand feasts, processions, and ceremonies. Some historians suggest that this blend of divine claim and practical governance created a delicate balance, one that could crumble if the perception of sacred authority faltered. It was a system where every gesture, every word, every appearance had to reinforce the illusion of unity and divine favor. The Tlatoani was both the eye of the storm and the calm at its center, a figure whose power was inseparable from the devotion of the people and the awe inspired by the gods themselves. Yet, even as the ruler walked among the halls of his palace. Adorned with gold and feathers, the question lingered like a shadow: could mere mortals truly channel the will of the gods? Or were they destined to fall under the weight of their own ambition and the insatiable demands of the divine? As the sun rose over the shimmering waters of Lake Texcoco, casting long, liquid shadows across the city of Tenochtitlan, a different kind of power began to emerge, one born not from conquest, but from survival under foreign eyes. The fall of Cuauhtlatoque in 1521 marked a shift unlike any Tenochtitlan had seen. The last true Tlatoani, captured and humiliated by the Spanish, held a title in name only while his sovereignty dissolved like mist over the lake. Some scholars suggest that the Spanish, wary of their own allies' ambitions and mistrustful of the former Triple Alliance's reach, deliberately kept Cuauhtémoc alive, a living symbol whose authority was visible but impotent, a mirror reflecting both courage and subjugation. The brutal spectacle of his torture, forced to walk over scorching coals in search of hidden treasures, remains etched in legend and codices, a chilling reminder of how the gods of war and the gods of conquest could collide in human suffering. Following this, the Spanish installed a series of Cuauhtlatocan rulers, meant to mimic the authority of a Tlatoani, but stripped of its dynastic legitimacy. These men, often commoners elevated by colonial fiat, ruled not through the sacred bond of lineage, but through the coercive presence of the conquistadors. They were placeholders, their power a fragile veneer, accepted reluctantly by a people whose eyes still remembered the sovereign splendor of the Tlatoani. Some codices record these rulers as if they were legitimate, yet the silence of others speaks volumes, an omission heavy with the weight of legitimacy denied. The first of these, Tlaquetzin, never even reached the capital before death claimed him, a reminder of how tenuous survival could be under foreign rule. His successors, Motelquetzin and Ixoyaquentzin, navigated a treacherous world of colonial demands and indigenous resentment, each decision a delicate dance between submission and self-preservation. Researchers argued that this puppet governance was strategic, designed to assert Spanish control while maintaining the illusion of continuity, to placate a population still reeling from war, disease, and the annihilation of the old order. Yet the Cuauhtlatoque were more than mere instruments. They were symbols of a liminal state, a threshold between empire and colony, between the sacred and the profane. Their reigns raise unsettling questions. Could authorities survive when stripped of divine sanction? Or did their very existence signal the inevitable erosion of a civilization's soul? As the lakes lapped against the city's canals and the echoes of temple bells faded into the distance, the story of Tenochtitlan's lost sovereignty lingered like a ghost, whispering of gods who demanded blood, men who wielded fragile power, and an empire standing on the precipice of history by 1538. The Spanish, seeking to solidify their tenuous hold over the Valley of Mexico, made a decision that would reshape the heart of the Aztec world. Dynastic rule was restored to the throne of Tenochtitlan, though now under the shadow of colonial oversight. Antonio de Mendoza, the Viceroy of New Spain, likely recognized that governing through familiar structures of a Tlatoani and ceremonial rites would lend an air of legitimacy to the Spanish crown, even as real power rested in European hands. The Mexican nobility, scarred yet resilient, were allowed a voice in electing a new Tlatoani, a candidate whose name would then be forwarded for confirmation to the Spanish authorities. This hybrid system created a delicate equilibrium, a dance of appearances, indigenous rulers offering continuity and ritual, the Spanish enforcing control behind the scenes. Juanitzin, grandnephew of Moctezuma II, was the first to ascend in this restored lineage. Bilingual, charismatic, and deeply connected to the Nahua elite, he became a bridge between worlds, revered by his people, yet watched closely by colonial overseers. Following him, Tenochtitlan ruled from 1541 to 1554. His tenure punctuated by intermediaries like Omok, whose temporary stewardship underscores the fragile nature of authority in these early colonial years. Then came Sesitzin, and finally Sipak, whose reigns were fraught with conflict over taxation, law, and the Spanish assertion of ultimate authority. Each ruler navigated a labyrinth of loyalty, coercion, and negotiation. Their personal prestige constantly weighed against the demands of a foreign empire. Researchers suggest that this system allowed the Spanish to maintain dominance without the expense of direct governance, a strategy rooted in both pragmatism and fear of revolt. Meanwhile, the Mexica themselves wrestled with contradictions. Their reverence for Tlatoani, their memory of conquest, and their adaptation to a world where gods and men were both questioned. The city, once a sovereign marvel built on lakes and causeways, now lived under an uneasy peace, its sacred precincts and temples standing as silent witnesses to the shifting tides of power. As Tenochtitlan's canals reflected the morning light, one could almost hear the echoes of past glories mingling with the whispers of submission. How does a civilization reconcile the presence of its own rulers when those rulers are bound, not to the gods, but to an alien crown? And in the shadows of this restored dynastic rule, the people of Tenochtitlan would continue to navigate the delicate boundary between old loyalties and new obligations. A tension that would define the next decades of life in an empire once mighty, now reconfigured by conquest and cunning alike. In the Aztec world, the distinction between nobles and commoners was not merely social, it was cosmic, etched into the very fabric of daily life and ritual. A reflection of an ordered universe where hierarchy mirrored divine favor. The Pilton, or nobility, were more than wealthy landowners. They were the embodiment of privilege, granted the right to wear finery, to consume luxury, and to command labor, their estates a microcosm of the empire's intricate social network. Among them, the Teuton, or High Lords, held sway over political, military, and ceremonial life, their authority both feared and respected, their decisions rippling through the Altpetal like hidden currents beneath calm waters. In contrast, the Mixhultan, originally peasants but later encompassing artisans, warriors, and traders, formed the backbone of the city's vitality. Only a fraction tilled the soil, while the majority devoted themselves to crafts, trade, or the arduous demands of warfare. Slavery existed, but it was transactional, not hereditary. A tool for survival in a society that still valued skill and bravery above birth alone. Yet the lines between classes were porous in ways the Spanish often failed to understand. A commoner who captured enough enemies in battle could acquire symbols of prestige, ascend through ranks, and even enjoy the privileges of the noble class of fluidity that made the Aztec social hierarchy dynamic, almost alive. Gender added another layer to this intricate web. Families were bilateral, inheritance flowing to sons and daughters alike, granting women economic agency unusual for the time, though their public roles remained circumscribed. Men labored in fields, markets, and battlefields, while women managed households, but could also become merchants, midwives, or healers. Their work seen as complementary to the cosmic balance of male and female duties. Among nobles, marriages were strategic alliances, polygamy a means of consolidating power and influence, while commoners adhered to stricter norms. Every cupola, the fundamental unit of commoner organization, functioned as both a kinship network and a territorial unit, distributing land, organizing labor, and representing its people in the Cuauhtlatoque government when necessary. Together, the Pilton and their households formed a delicate lattice of obligations, rights, and expectations, a social machine as precise and interdependent as the chinampas that sustained it. But beneath this apparent order, questions lingered. How did commoners truly perceive the nobility now under Spanish scrutiny? And how did nobles reconcile ancient privileges with the reality of colonial vassals? The answers remain shrouded, hidden in codices, whispered stories, and the very stones of Tenochtitlan itself, waiting for the careful ear of those who dare to listen. In the Aztec world, power and identity were inseparable from place, and nowhere was this more evident than in the Cuauhtlatoque, the city-state that served as both political heart and cultural soul. Each Cuauhtlatoque, translating to Water Mountain, was a universe unto itself, a landscape of canals, temples, and plazas where religion, governance, and daily life intertwined seamlessly. The Tlatoani, or ruler, was the living axis around which the Cuauhtlatoque revolved, wielding authority over nobles and commoners alike, though always balanced by a system of obligations, kinship ties, and ritual performance. Within the Cuauhtlatoque, Calpolis functioned as the skeletal structure of social organization, each a network of families linked by blood, marriage, and shared labor. Land was allocated collectively within these units, and through them, commoners could fulfill obligations to nobles while maintaining the cohesion of their own kinship groups. Calpoli were not merely administrative tools. They were cultural incubators, schools of craft, tradition, and ritual, shaping identity from the youngest child to the seasoned warrior. Each Calpoli specialized in skills that supported the Cuauhtlatoque, from weaving to obsidian toolmaking, from the management of chinampas to the training of future jaguar and eagle warriors. This specialization created neighborhoods with a rhythm and texture distinct from the general hum of the city. A mosaic of labor and expertise where the tangible and symbolic overlap. The Cuauhtlatoque also served as a stage for identity and loyalty, binding its inhabitants to a shared mythos of origin, conquest, and cosmic order. Residents might speak different languages or follow diverse local customs, yet allegiance to the Tlatoani and participation in collective ritual created cohesion, a web that tied the personal to the political, the sacred to the mundane. The Spanish would later manipulate this structure, exploiting Calpolis to extract taxes and labor, but in pre-conquest times, the Cuauhtlatoque was as much a spiritual organism as a political entity. A living city with arteries of canals and plazas pumping life through its people. Some researchers suggest that understanding the Cuauhtlatoque is essential to understanding the Aztec Empire itself, for it reveals how authority, social cohesion, and cultural identity were maintained not by brute force alone, but through a delicate balance of ritual, labor, and shared belief. And yet, even as these city-states thrived, questions linger about the unseen tensions within them, tensions between commoners and nobles, between ritual obligation and personal desire, between loyalty to the city and the demands of the gods. How did these invisible threads shape the choices of the people? And what secrets did the Calpoli hold beneath the hum of daily life? By the mid-15th century, the Aztec world had coalesced into a formidable hegemonic network known as the Triple Alliance, binding Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan into a confederation whose power stretched across the Valley of Mexico and beyond. Unlike European empires with strict administrative hierarchies, the Triple Alliance ruled largely through influence, expectation, and strategic coercion, a system that some historians describe as a hegemonic empire rather than a centralized state. Subject Oldpetal retained local rulers, continued their own rituals, and maintained some autonomy. Yet they were bound to pay tribute and provide warriors when called upon. A delicate balance of submission and survival. Taxes and tribute flowed like rivers through the empire, in the form of exotic feathers, obsidian, cacao, textiles, and food. Each item a tangible expression of obedience and acknowledgement of Aztec supremacy. The Pochteka, long-distance merchant guilds, traveled these tributary networks, trading goods, gathering intelligence, and even acting as unofficial diplomats, their journeys weaving together the empire's disparate regions into a web of commerce and influence. Some researchers believe that this economic interconnection was as critical to the empire's stability as its military might, a way of binding allies and enemies alike to Tenochtitlan's orbit without continuous bloodshed. Yet this empire was not without tension. The further one moved from the central lakes, the thinner the threads of loyalty, and distant provinces often resisted tribute or secretly maintained allegiances to older regional powers. Strategic provinces, particularly those along trade routes or near hostile neighbors like the Tarascans, were managed more directly with garrisons, puppet rulers, and, in some cases, population transfers to secure loyalty and prevent rebellion. Even within the core, Tenochtitlan exerted influence subtly, relying on the prestige of the Tlatoani ritual performance and the symbolism of power to command obedience. Festivals, sacrifices, and ceremonies were not merely religious. They were acts of political theater, reinforcing the centrality of Tenochtitlan and its gods, while reminding subject peoples of the consequences of defiance. And yet, despite the grandeur, scholars ask, how fragile was this system really? Did loyalty mask resentment, and did tribute hide simmering unrest that could one day erupt? The Triple Alliance, in all its calculated authority and ceremonial splendor, held together by the thin strands of ritual, obligation, and fear, stands as a haunting reminder that empires, no matter how mighty, are always vulnerable to the cracks beneath their polished surfaces. What unseen forces, what whispered dissent, lingered in the shadows of this empire, waiting for the moment to challenge the gods themselves. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, life and death were inseparable, intertwined in a rhythm dictated by gods whose appetite for blood shaped the destiny of an entire civilization. The Aztecs believed in Teotl, a sacred, dynamic force that infused every element of existence, yet it was not distant or abstract. It demanded action, attention, and sacrifice. Among the pantheon, Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, loomed largest, a deity whose hunger for human hearts was said to fuel the sun's journey across the sky. Tlaloc, the rain god, required the tears of children to nourish the earth. These demands were not symbolic gestures. They were believed to be necessary for the continuation of life itself. Priests, cloaked in jaguar skins and adorned with feathers, performed rituals on the towering temples of Tenochtitlan, where the city's pulse could be felt in the chants, the drums, and the steady drumbeat of human hearts laid bare. Some researchers suggest that these sacrifices, as brutal as they were, served multiple purposes. They reinforced political authority, instilled fear, and maintained cosmic balance according to Aztec cosmology. Victims, often war captives from neighboring Cuauhtlatoque, were treated with a ritualized precision. The method of sacrifice gutting the chest, offering the heart, or throwing victims down the steps of pyramids was laden with symbolism, ensuring the energy of the life force was fully transferred to the deity. The scale was staggering during major festivals. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, would be sacrificed, their blood pooling on stone altars, their bodies carried away for ritual burning or ceremonial disposal. Outsiders often regarded these acts with horror, yet to the Mexica, these ceremonies were acts of devotion, necessity, and cosmic responsibility. Even the streets of Tenochtitlan resonated with this devotion. Images of sacrificial instruments, skull racks, and ceremonial attire served as constant reminders of mortality and duty. Beyond the city, in distant provinces, the obligation to deliver victims as tribute reinforced the authority of the Triple Alliance and tied far-flung communities to the spiritual and political heart of the empire. Scholars continue to debate whether these rituals were primarily religious, political, or psychological tools, and some suggest the Aztecs themselves might have viewed them as inseparable from the natural order. As we consider the chilling precision, the grandeur, and the terrifying devotion, one cannot help but wonder, did the gods truly demand blood? Or did the humans who claimed to serve them find in sacrifice a power of their own? The answers remain as elusive as the rising sun over Lake Texcoco, a mystery that invites us to look deeper into the shadows of the Aztec world. As we leave the terrifying spectacle of ritual sacrifice, we move to the very foundations of Aztec power, the Cuauhtlatoque, the city-states that were the lifeblood of this sprawling civilization. Each Cuauhtlatoque, meaning water mountain, was more than a mere settlement. It was a living organism, a community bound together by land, kinship, and allegiance to a Tlatoani, the ruler whose word shaped life and death within its walls. The capitals of these city-states were hubs of ceremony, commerce, and political maneuvering, where grand pyramids rose as physical manifestations of divine order, and plazas echoed with the chants of priests and the footsteps of traders. Around these centers, the population spread into smaller settlements, villages, and farmland, yet all recognized the authority of the Cuauhtlatoque. Within each, the Cuauhtlatoque, a subdivision often based on kinship networks, organized labor, land use, and social structure, ensuring that commoners had a defined role and responsibilities. Some researchers suggest that the Cuauhtlatoque also acted as a training ground, instilling in young men and women a sense of duty, skill, and identity. Nobles, or Pipeltin, commanded influence across the Cuauhtlatoque, owning estates, directing labor, and serving as military leaders, while commoners, carried out the essential work of agriculture, craft, and trade. Yet even among the commoners, ambition and skill could elevate status. A warrior who captured enemies could earn privileges once reserved for nobility, a visual reminder that merit, at least in battle, could alter one's fate. The Cuauhtlatoque was fiercely independent in identity, often speaking different languages within its borders, yet bound by shared customs and loyalty. War between Cuauhtlatoque was constant, a mechanism for both survival and expansion, and yet the Aztec Empire itself operated more as a hegemonic confederacy than a centralized state, with local rulers restored after conquest in exchange for tribute and loyalty. This structure allowed the Aztecs to dominate vast and diverse territories, extracting wealth while maintaining a sense of local governance. The geography itself reinforced the Cuauhtlatoque's distinctiveness. Lake-dotted valleys, highland plains, and river networks shaped trade, agriculture, and defense. One could almost hear the rhythm of life in these city-states, the splash of canoes on canals, the clatter of obsidian tools, the hum of marketplaces, the distant drumbeats from the temples. Yet for all their organization and apparent stability, the Cuauhtlatoque were also fragile, dependent on tribute, alliances, and the delicate balance of power with the Triple Alliance. And so, as we examine these city-states, we are left to wonder, how did a civilization so meticulous in structure reconcile with the chaos and terror demanded by the gods above? The answer, it seems, lies in the very heart of the empire itself, waiting to be uncovered from the intricate organization of the Cuauhtlatoque. We now turn to the broader reach of Aztec power, the Triple Alliance, a confederation of Tenochtitlan and Tlacapan that forged the empire into a network of tribute, warfare, and political cunning. Unlike European monarchies that claimed absolute dominion, the Aztec Empire thrived on indirect rule, a web of influence that depended as much on persuasion and ritual obligation as on swords and obsidian blades. Some researchers argue that this system was remarkably efficient, allowing the Mexica to control vast and ethnically diverse lands without overextending themselves, while others suggest it was a fragile construct, constantly balancing local loyalties with imperial demands. The Triple Alliance exercised power through a combination of strategic military conquest and ritualized subjugation, often allowing conquered rulers to maintain nominal authority in exchange for regular tribute, a blend of practicality and intimidation. Tribute was the lifeblood of the empire, flowing from distant provinces in the form of food, luxury goods, and human captives destined for the temples. These gifts were catalogued meticulously, recorded in codices that chronicled the wealth and reach of Tenochtitlan's influence. Yet the Triple Alliance was far from a homogeneous empire. Each member city-state retained its own political structures, culture, and identity, bound together by shared interests in war, tribute, and religious obligation. This hegemony was not only territorial but symbolic, the very act of conquest and the display of power in ceremonies reinforced the Mexican narrative of divine favor and martial supremacy. Researchers note that some regions, like Cuauhtlatoque, were strategic and heavily invested in, with permanent garrisons, while others were simply tributary, left largely autonomous so long as taxes were paid. The empire's expansion was relentless, a combination of calculated diplomacy, military might, and ritualized terror, with warriors capturing enemies not merely for strategic advantage, but to supply the gods' insatiable hunger for blood. Here, in this tension between governance and ritual, we glimpse the duality of Aztec civilization, a sophisticated society capable of complex administration, urban planning, and trade, yet one that wove fear, sacrifice, and spectacle into the very fabric of authority. It is within this balance of order and violence that the Triple Alliance thrived, its power radiating outward like ripples across the lakes and valleys of central Mexico. And yet, despite this seeming strength, the very system that elevated Tenochtitlan and its allies also carried the seeds of fragility. How long could a civilization sustain itself on tribute and terror before the demands of the gods and the ambitions of men collided? This question hung over the empire like a shadow, a reminder that even the mightiest confederacy is subject to forces both seen and unseen. As the Triple Alliance extended its influence, the wheels of economy and tribute turned relentlessly. A system where every town, every village, every Calpoli contributed to the lifeblood of the empire. Yet few understood the vast machinery behind it. Sit back and imagine the marketplaces of Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco, vast open squares thrumming with life. The air thick with the scent of roasted maize cacao, and the metallic tang of obsidian blades being sharpened. Traders, both local and long-distance, Cuauhtlatoque, wove through the crowds, their eyes scanning for rare goods, jade, turquoise, fine cotton cloth, exotic feathers from the farthest reaches of Mesoamerica. Each transaction was more than commerce. It was a reinforcement of hierarchy, a reminder of the empire's reach, and an opportunity to elevate status through wealth and skill. Tribute from conquered provinces flowed like a river into the heart of Tenochtitlan: cacao beans, cotton, textiles, precious stones, foodstuffs, and, most crucially, human captives for the rituals of the gods. Some researchers suggest that the meticulous organization of tribute ensured the empire's stability, creating networks of dependency that bound distant communities to the Mexica in complex and often coercive ways. Others argue that the system was inherently precarious, reliant on continual conquest and compliance, a delicate balance of coercion, diplomacy, and ceremonial obligation. The codices, vibrant and detailed, record the goods brought to the capital, each glyph a testament to both wealth and subjugation, a reminder of how tightly economy, politics, and religion were intertwined. The Cuauhtlatoque were not mere merchants. They were the eyes and ears of the empire, carrying information back to Tenochtitlan, ensuring distant rulers remained loyal, and maintaining the flow of exotic goods that dazzled nobles and commoners alike. Markets operated on strict schedules, sometimes daily in large cities, every fifth day in smaller towns, a rhythm that structured life and reinforced order. Standardized currency, from cacao beans for small purchases to Cuauhtlatoque cloth for larger transactions, allowed for the management of wealth across an empire that was both geographically vast and culturally diverse. Yet beneath the surface of trade and tribute lay tension, the constant pressure on local populations to meet their obligations, the fear of rebellion, and the omnipresent demand for captives that fed the sacred fires. In this intricate system of exchange, the Aztecs created not merely an economy, but a living, breathing network of influence, loyalty and fear, where every gift, every coin, every sacrifice reinforced the invisible web of power. And as we explore deeper, we begin to see how this delicate balance of wealth, tribute, and ritual would shape the very destiny of an empire built on the edge of blood and devotion, leaving us to wonder, could such a system endure forever? Or was it destined to crack under the weight of its own ambition? Step with me now into the very heart of the Aztec world, the island city of Tenochtitlan, rising like a jewel in the shimmering waters of Lake Texcoco, a place both astonishing in its scale and chilling in its precision. Picture a city carefully planned along 4 quadrants, its streets and canals forming a geometric rhythm, the waters reflecting the brilliant sunlight and the shadows of towering pyramids. At the center loomed the Templo Mayor, the great temple, a monumental double pyramid with twin shrines to Tlaloc, god of rain, and Huitzilopochtli, god of war and sun. Each stone carefully cut and aligned, the staircases wide and imposing, where the bodies of sacrificial victims were carried with solemn ceremony, their lifeblood a vital offering to sustain the cosmos, or so the priests believed. The sacred precinct was surrounded by the houses of the nobility, the comicac schools, ball courts, and the Templo, a grisly display of skulls that reminded everyone of mortality and the price of defiance. Researchers suggest that the scale of Tenochtitlan, with estimates ranging from 200,000 to over 300,000 inhabitants, rivaled some of the largest European cities of the time. Yet it was not merely its size that awed visitors. It was the fusion of architecture, ritual, and urban planning that made it feel alive, as if the city itself breathed in sync with the rhythm of the heavens. Canals intersected with causeways, carrying canoes laden with maize, fish, and exotic goods from the markets, filling the air with the constant hum of commerce and the cries of traders and buyers. A sensory tapestry of color, sound, and smell. Temples were adorned with carved stone, painted murals, and offerings of obsidian, jade, and gold, each detail imbued with symbolism. A reflection of a society obsessed with balance, cosmology, and divine favor. Scholars debate whether the city's layout was designed purely for practical reasons, or if it was intended as a microcosm of the universe, a terrestrial reflection of celestial order, where every plaza, pyramid, and canal corresponded to directions, seasons, and sacred cycles. Walking these streets, one could feel the weight of power, the invisible pressure of social hierarchy, the constant reminder that life, labor, and even death were intertwined with the needs of gods who demanded attention, obedience, and blood. And yet, behind this grandeur, whispers of tension lingered, for such concentration of wealth, ritual, and authority was a magnet for envy and rebellion. An ever-present question looming over the empire: how long could the city maintain its delicate balance of awe and fear before the currents of change swept through its canals and streets, altering the destiny of all who lived within its sacred walls? Now, let us drift from the sacred precinct to the bustling heart of daily life. The grand marketplace of Cuauhtlatoque, sister city to Tenochtitlan, where up to 60,000 souls converged in a daily symphony of trade, voices rising, feet shuffling, and the clatter of goods exchanged in rapid negotiation. Imagine the scent of roasted maize mingling with the earthy temps of fresh vegetables, the sharp, metallic aroma of obsidian blades, the sweetness of cacao beans, and the faint, exotic perfume of feathers dyed in every conceivable color. Stalls lined with woven mats displayed a kaleidoscope of items: pottery, textiles, jewelry, and tools, each crafted by specialized artisans, some of whom labored for entire neighborhoods dedicated solely to their craft. Among these merchants, the Cuauhtlatoque long-distance traders of elite status wove their intricate networks across Mesoamerica, bringing exotic luxuries from far-flung corners: jade from the highlands, turquoise from the deserts, and the occasional rare tropical bird from the southern lowlands, an artery of wealth pulsing through the empire. These markets were not merely economic centers, but stages where social hierarchy and political power were displayed, where a commoner could glimpse the rarefied world of nobles, and where nobles could reinforce their status through conspicuous consumption and sponsorship of lavish offerings. Some researchers believe the markets also served as subtle instruments of control, allowing the empire to monitor trade, extract taxes, and assert influence over neighboring city-states, ensuring that allegiance and tribute flowed in rhythm with imperial demand. Visualize the organized chaos: supervisors patrolling the stalls, admonishing those who cheated, punishing with public shame. A system both structured and organic, like the currents of the lake surrounding the city itself. As you walk through, the clinking of Cuauhtlatoque, the standardized cloth currency, exchanges for cacao beans and foodstuffs echo in your mind, the tangible measure of value in this complex economy. Yet even amid abundance, the underlying tension remains its trade. Each transaction, a reminder of the delicate balance between prosperity and subjugation, cooperation and coercion. And so, as the sun arcs overhead, casting elongated shadows across the bustling plazas, one cannot help but wonder, beneath the vibrant commerce, amid the laughter, bargaining, and movement, what hidden networks of intrigue, espionage, and political maneuvering swirled like currents beneath the surface, shaping the empire's fate as surely as the gods demanded the flow of blood and tribute. From the clamorous markets, we drift to the tranquil, almost otherworldly landscapes of the Chinampa, the Aztec floating gardens that transformed the shallow waters of Lake Texcoco into a patchwork of vibrant green fields, an engineering marvel that blurred the line between nature and human ingenuity. Picture long, narrow rectangles of fertile soil layered atop reeds and mud, anchored with wooden stakes, each plot meticulously cultivated to yield 7 crops a year. Maize standing tall and golden, beans creeping along its stalks, and squashes spreading broad leaves over the water's mirror-like surface. Narrow canals threaded through these gardens, reflecting the sky and clouds above, providing both irrigation and passage as farmers glided silently in canoes, their paddles disturbing only the water's gentle ripple. The scent of wet earth, mixed with the sweet aroma of ripening fruit and the faint tang of fish from the surrounding lake, would have enveloped the senses, a living, breathing mosaic of life sustained by ingenuity and devotion. Some researchers suggest that these gardens were more than food sources. They were symbols of the empire's reach and the Mexica's control over their environment, a testament to human adaptation and the ability to bend the natural world to the demands of an expanding urban population. It is said that a single hectare of Chinampa could feed 20 people, and with over 9,000 hectares cultivated, the city could sustain hundreds of thousands, making these gardens the very lungs and heart of Tenochtitlan. Imagine walking among these fields, the buzz of insects hovering over water lilies, birds dipping into the canals, and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface, a delicate ecosystem nurtured with both precision and ritual. The labor was immense, yet it created abundance, allowing the empire to channel human effort into trade, warfare, and ceremonial life. Yet, beneath this seeming harmony, there lingered a quiet tension. Water levels could shift, disease could strike, and the very fertility that sustained the people was precarious, dependent on careful balance and constant vigilance. The Chinampas were a marvel, a silent testimony to the Mexica's ingenuity and resilience. And yet one cannot help but sense the fragility beneath the surface, a reflection, perhaps, of the empire itself, flourishing in brilliance, yet vulnerable to the forces both natural and human that would one day converge to challenge its dominion. What unseen threats, what subtle imbalances might have lingered in the watery veins of this floating metropolis, quietly shaping the destiny of those who walked its narrow paths. Next, we move from the serene Chinampas to the frenetic heartbeat of the Aztec capital, the marketplaces, where the very air seemed to vibrate with the rhythm of commerce, negotiation, and human ambition. Imagine the vast central market of Cuauhtlatoque, where Quartz himself reported crowds numbering up to 60,000. A sea of people swaying like reeds in a wind of sound, color, and motion. the aroma of roasting cacao, the tang of fresh fish, and the earthy scent of maize mingled with the faint sweetness of exotic flowers, while vendors shouted their wares with practiced urgency, calling attention to beans, turkeys, feathers, and jade trinkets, each item a reflection of distant lands and hidden journeys. Among the throng, the pochtaker, the elite long-distance merchants, moved like silent shadows, their eyes sharp, calculating routes and alliances, returning with obsidian, precious stones, and exotic spices that had traversed mountains, rivers, and deserts to reach this center of civilization. Some scholars believe these markets were not merely commercial centers, but vital arteries through which political influence and intelligence flowed. Networks of information that connected the empire's disparate regions and allowed Tenochtitlan to maintain hegemony over a mosaic of subject peoples. The Cuauhtlatoque strips of finely woven cotton served as currency, tangible proof of value and status, while cacao beans, small yet potent, mediated the everyday transactions of the commoners, linking labor, tribute, and survival in a delicate equilibrium. Walk among the stalls, and you would see artisans displaying intricate obsidian blades, feathered headdresses glimmering in the sun, and vibrant textiles dyed in reds and blues that told stories of distant rivers and sacred mountains. Children darted between legs, merchants argued over weight and price, and the occasional ceremonial procession moved through, reminding all that trade existed not in isolation but as part of the rhythm of the cosmos, sanctioned by gods and ancestors alike. Yet, beneath this dazzling surface, tension simmered. Taxes had to be collected, tribute enforced, and rivalries kept in check. The shadow of imperial authority never far from the bustle of the crowd. The markets of Tenochtitlan were a dance of abundance and control, of spectacle and obligation, a reflection of the empire's wealth, complexity, and precarious balance. And in this symphony of human endeavor, one must wonder how many secrets, hidden deals, and quiet rebellions passed unnoticed, carried like whispers through the alleys of this vast, humming marketplace. From the bustling markets, we now ascend to the sacred heights of Tenochtitlan, where stone staircases rose like the spine of the city itself, leading to the Templo Mayor, the great temple, a twin pyramid that pierced the sky and anchored the Aztec cosmos. Imagine the sheer scale, a stepped edifice, its double staircase leading to twin shrines, one dedicated to Cuauhtlatoque, god of rain and fertility, the other to Huitzilopochtli, god of war, and the soon each shrine, a threshold between the mortal realm and the divine. The air around the temple was thick with the scent of burning copal, incense smoke curling upward, carrying prayers and fears toward unseen heavens. The walls of the temple, carved with intricate glyphs and jaguar motifs, seemed to pulse with energy, as though the stone itself remembered centuries of devotion, sacrifice, and ritual. Priests, adorned in elaborate feathered headdresses, moved with precise ceremony, their voices chanting in rhythm with drums and flutes, creating a hypnotic cadence that echoed through the plaza below, a soundscape that was both alluring and terrifying. From one corner, the tenpantli, the skull rack, loomed as a chilling reminder of the god's demand, countless skulls displayed, gleaming white in the sunlight, each one a testament to lives given to appease divine forces, a stark warning that power and piety were inseparable in Aztec life. Researchers suggest that the Templo Mayor functioned not only as a religious center, but as the symbolic navel of the world, the point where the horizontal plane of humans met the vertical plane of the heavens and the underworld. concentrating the spiritual and political authority of the empire. Pilgrims from distant Cuauhtlatoque traveled here to pay tribute, offer goods, and witness rituals that intertwined life, death, and cosmic order in ways that outsiders could scarcely comprehend. Even the approach to the temple was deliberate. Causeways, canals, and plazas choreographed movement and attention, guiding the eye to the sacred summit, enforcing a hierarchy that mirrored the universe itself. Yet, despite this grandeur, one cannot help but feel a lingering unease. For every chant, every offering, there was an underlying tension, a constant negotiation with forces beyond human control, and a haunting question that shadowed the city: how much blood, how much devotion would the gods demand before their thirst was finally sated? As we descend from the sacred heights of the Templo Mayor, we step into the living, breathing streets of Tenochtitlan, where the rhythm of Aztec society unfolded in a delicate balance of power, duty, and expectation. The Pilton, the noble class, moved through the city with an air of authority and privilege, their finely woven garments, embroidered with feathers and adorned with turquoise and gold, marking them as both leaders and spiritual intermediaries. They commanded land, oversaw the labor of commoners, and held positions in the government and military. Yet their lives were tightly interwoven with ceremonial obligations, for even status could not shield them from the expectations of the gods. Meanwhile, the Maxholten, the commoners, filled the city with energy and purpose, from the artisans crafting obsidian knives and ceramic wares, to the farmers tending chinampas on the lake, to the merchants navigating the labyrinth of Tlatelolco's market, a place of vibrant color, sound, and motion, where cacao beans, coarsely clothed, and exotic feathers exchanged hands amidst a symphony of negotiation and observation. Some researchers believe that this social structure was maintained, not merely through hierarchy, but through a network of responsibilities and reciprocal obligations, where nobles offered protection and leadership, while commoners provided labor, goods, and tribute, a system that intertwined economic necessity with spiritual duty. Women, too, moved within this structured society, their roles defined yet crucial, responsible for domestic management, child-rearing, weaving, and even practicing medicine or serving as midwives. Their labor a mirror of the cosmic balance, complementing the warriors' and priests' active engagement with the outside world. Marriage among nobles was a political strategy, a way to consolidate power and reinforce alliances, while polygamy, though less common among commoners, demonstrated the intertwined nature of family, inheritance, and status. Education and discipline were pervasive, with children trained from a young age in the arts, crafts, religious observance, and martial skill. Their development seen as preparation for both earthly duties and spiritual obligations. Yet, beneath this ordered society, there simmered tension and fear, the ever-present reminder that failure, debt, or disobedience could lead to enslavement, punishment, or ritual sacrifice, a shadow that lent the city a quiet intensity, a hum of vigilance that pervaded daily life. And as one observes the interplay of wealth, labor, faith, and fear, a question arises: how did such a complex, demanding society sustain itself so fully, balancing the mundane and the divine, without fracturing under the weight of its own expectations? To understand the Aztec world, one must step beyond Tenochtitlan and into the network of city-states, the Cuauhtlatoque, each a kingdom unto itself, a microcosm of order, identity, and ritual. The word Cuauhtlatoque, meaning water mountain, evokes the intimate connection the Mexica felt with their landscape, where lakes, hills, and canals defined not just geography but social and spiritual life. Each Cuauhtlatoque was ruled by a Tlatoani, a leader whose authority was both political and sacred, overseeing nobles, priests, and commoners, weaving together governance, tribute collection, and religious observance into a single intricate tapestry. The city was a hub, but its power radiated outward into smaller settlements, each Cuauhtlatoque functioning as both a kinship network and a local administrative unit. In these Cuauhtlatoque, commoners worked plots of land, contributed labor to public projects, and maintained local temples, creating a sense of communal responsibility that underpinned the entire social order. Some scholars suggest that the Cuauhtlatoque also served as a training ground for future warriors, craftsmen, and civic leaders, embedding loyalty and skill from one generation to the next. The Cuauhtlatoque's identity was fiercely local, even as the Triple Alliance forged a broader empire. Inhabitants of one city-state often saw themselves as distinct from, or in rivalry with, neighboring Cuauhtlatoque, yet shared religious festivals, trade networks, and language with other Nahuatl-speaking communities. This duality of local pride and imperial participation created a dynamic tension, where allegiance could be both pragmatic and deeply emotional. The Spanish would later exploit this, manipulating divisions and leveraging loyalty to maintain control, but within the Aztec period. This structure allowed for both remarkable resilience and rapid mobilization for war or ritual. Military campaigns were organized not just at the empire-wide level, but through the coordination of Cuauhtlatoque and Cuauhtlatoque, each contributing warriors, resources, and strategy. Beyond warfare, the Cuauhtlatoque regulated markets, resolved disputes, and maintained temples and schools, embodying a governance that was simultaneously civic, religious, and social. Even everyday life, access to land, labor duties, ceremonial participation was mediated through these units, embedding a sense of duty and belonging in each individual. And yet, for all this structure, the Cuauhtlatoque was more than a bureaucratic machine. It was alive with ceremonies, markets, and festivals, a network pulsing with human energy and divine expectation. Standing at the edge of a lake, watching canoes glide between listening to the chants rising from a temple, one cannot help but wonder, in such a tightly organized yet vibrant society, what kept the balance between order and chaos, between life and the ever-looming shadow of sacrifice. Beneath the surface of Aztec society, beyond temples and ceremonies, flowed the lifeblood of the empire, tribute. Every conquered Cuauhtlatoque, every subject town, became part of a vast network of resources, feeding the heart of Tenochtitlan and sustaining the Triple Alliance's ambitions. Tribute was not merely taxation. It was a system that intertwined economy, politics, and ritual, a reminder that the gods demanded both wealth and obedience. Exotic goods like jade, cacao, quetzal feathers, and precious textiles moved along carefully monitored routes, arriving at the central market of Cuauhtlatoque, where tens of thousands would gather, voices rising in a cacophony of haggling and ritual observation. Some researchers believe that the tribute lists in codices, meticulously detailing who owed what, were designed not only for administration but as a psychological assertion of dominance, reinforcing the presence of the empire in the minds of its subjects. The Pochteka, long-distance merchants, navigated these channels with precision, acting as traders, spies, and enforcers. Their caravans, moving silently through forests, valleys, and lakes, carrying both wealth and knowledge of distant lands. In return, the empire invested in certain strategic regions, maintaining garrisons, installing loyal rulers, or even relocating populations to ensure compliance. Tribute had its rhythms: corn, beans, or local crops, artisans' goods, or rare minerals collected at specific intervals. But it was more than material. It was a constant, tangible reminder of the Aztec order, the invisible lines of power threading through towns and villages, connecting local life to the pulse of an empire built on both reverence and fear. And yet, this system was fragile, dependent on local rulers' cooperation, the memory of conquest, and the willingness of the conquered to provide labor and goods without revolt. Some towns resisted, while others embraced the network, seeing opportunity within the imperial structure. Observing from the sacred precinct in Tenochtitlan, with the great temple towering above, one could imagine the streams of tribute arriving daily, a river of wealth that fed the gods as much as it fed the people of the city. But what happens when that river slows, when a town falters or rebels, when the human element in this immense machine refuses to flow as intended? It is in these gaps, these uncertainties, that the empire's reliance on control, ritual, and coercion becomes clear. A subtle tension between the efficiency of organization and the unpredictability of human ambition, leaving us to wonder how much of this carefully balanced system teetered on the edge of collapse with each passing season. To truly understand the Aztec Empire, one must grasp the dual nature of warfare, both a tool of expansion and a sacred duty to the gods. Battles were not merely strategic conquests. They were performances, meticulously orchestrated displays of courage, devotion, and discipline. Warriors trained from youth, moving through schools that honed their strength, tactics, and ritual knowledge, learning to balance ferocity with precision. Some researchers suggest that the taking of captives for sacrifice was as central to campaigns as the accumulation of land or tribute, creating a tangible link between military action and cosmic obligation. Imagine the thrum of drums echoing through a misty battlefield, the scent of sweat and obsidian-cutting blades mingling with the smoke of ritual fires, banners snapping in the wind, each warrior both participant and spectacle, performing an intricate choreography that pleased gods and struck fear into enemies. Campaigns often targeted neighboring Altpatal, exploiting political rivalries and pre-existing animosities. Allies of the Spanish would later find that this network of enmity could be as dangerous as any army. The Aztec concept of the Flower War illustrates this duality: staged battles designed to capture prisoners without permanently altering territorial control. A dark theater of death and devotion, where every loss and every captive had meaning far beyond the immediate outcome. Warriors' ranks, from jaguar and eagle orders to commoner fighters, were markers of both status and spiritual potency, reflecting a society in which social mobility intertwined with acts of martial prowess and ritual service. Yet, the rhythm of war carried an omnipresent shadow. Those who fell in battle were not merely dead. They were transformed, their blood nourishing the gods, their bodies a reminder of the fragile boundary between life and the spiritual imperatives that governed the empire. Some suggest that this constant intertwining of conquest and sacrifice created a society perpetually on the edge, where violence was not just political but cosmological. Every arrow, loosed, or sword swung echoing through a complex universe of obligations and fears. And so, as the empire expanded its reach across the Valley of Mexico and beyond, we are left to wonder how much of Aztec warfare was calculated strategy, and how much was dictated by the whispers of the gods, demanding devotion, blood, and the relentless pursuit of cosmic balance. In the smoke and dust of battle, in the cries of captives and the chants of priests, the Aztec world reveals itself a civilization in which war and ritual were inseparable, leaving echoes that still stir our imagination centuries later. Step into the bustling heart of the Aztec Empire, where commerce and ritual intertwined to create a rhythm that sustained both city and cosmos. Picture the vast market of Cuauhtlatoque, the sister city to Tenochtitlan, alive with a tide of people, merchants calling out their wares, the clatter of obsidian knives, the rich scent of cacao and chili blending with the earthy aroma of freshly tilled maize. Some researchers suggest that up to 60,000 people may have visited daily, weaving through stalls of exotic goods brought from far-off provinces, jade beads glinting in the sunlight, brightly feathered capes shimmering, cacao beans spilling like tiny treasures from clay jars. Traders, known as pochtaker, moved in almost secretive guilds, their knowledge of distant lands rivaling that of any modern explorer, carrying information as precious as the luxury goods they traded, acting as both commerce, conduits, and eyes of the empire. The markets were more than economic centers. They were social theaters where nobles, commoners, and even captured warriors converged, negotiating not just prices but alliances, debts, and prestige. Taxes flowed through these same channels, a silent pulse of imperial control, recorded meticulously in codices, where tributes of cloth, food, feathers, and obsidian signaled both obedience and wealth. Imagine the textures underfoot, packed earth worn smooth by countless sandals, the occasional splash of canal water where merchants arrived by canoe, the constant murmur of deals struck and gossip exchanged. Some scholars propose that the market's organization mirrored the Aztec obsession with cosmic order. Every stall, every path, carefully arranged, a microcosm of the empire itself, where social hierarchies were visible, and merit or status could be displayed through the acquisition or possession of exotic goods. Within this chaos, commoners found ways to rise, their skill in trade or craft providing a path toward recognition, while nobles used the same spaces to assert authority and reinforce dynastic networks. The sheer scale of the markets, their unending hum of voices, scents, and movement, reflected the empire's vast reach and the delicate balance that allowed Tenochtitlan to flourish. And yet, hidden beneath the vibrancy was a shadow of tension. The same wealth that fueled prosperity could invite envy, rebellion, or the scrutiny of gods demanding their due. The question lingers, soft and insistent, in this relentless rhythm of trade, tribute, and social performance. How much of what we see was survival, and how much was devotion? A careful offering to keep the gods appeased and the empire alive. Now, turn your gaze to the sacred precinct of Tenochtitlan, the very nucleus of Aztec power and spirituality, where stone and sky converged in an imposing testament to human devotion and divine expectation. Imagine walking across causeways from the surrounding city, the air thick with smoke from countless incense burners, the pungent aroma of copal mingling with the faint tang of blood from recent offerings, a constant reminder of mortality and divine demand. At the center rose the Templo Mayor, a double-stepped pyramid piercing the heavens, its twin shrines dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the relentless god of war and sun, and Tlaloc, lord of rain and fertility. Each step up the pyramid was more than a physical ascent, it was a journey closer to cosmic alignment, a metaphorical climb through layers of existence, bridging the earthly and the celestial. Some researchers suggest that every stone was placed with astronomical precision, reflecting solstices and equinoxes, turning the temple itself into a celestial map, a calendar of gods. On ceremonial days, the plazas surrounding the temple would swell with tens of thousands of spectators. The rhythmic drumbeats of Cuauhtlatoque and the piercing cries of Topanosli filling the air, creating a visceral soundscape that stirred both awe and fear. Priests, adorned in elaborate feathered headdresses, moved through the crowd, performing rituals whose meaning was encoded in gestures, chants, and bloodletting, each act a contract with the universe itself. And then there were the sacrifices, the ultimate offering, where warriors captured in battle or chosen volunteers had their hearts removed, still beating, elevated toward the sky, an intimate and terrifying dialogue with the gods, believed to nourish the sun and maintain the delicate balance of existence. Observing from a distance, one could feel the weight of ritual as both spectacle and necessity. The city itself vibrating with collective anticipation, tension, and awe. Scholars continue to debate the psychological and social functions of such rituals. Were they purely religious, a tool for social control, or a combination of both, reinforcing the empire's hierarchy while feeding its deities? The Templo Mayor stood not only as stone and mortar, but as the tangible heartbeat of Tenochtitlan, where every human act, commerce, combat, devotion, was shadowed by the gods' unyielding gaze. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the pyramid steps, one cannot help but wonder, beneath the grandeur and ritual, how did the people reconcile the beauty of their city with the relentless demand for blood? How long could a society sustain itself at the mercy of gods so insistent, so unforgiving? As we step away from the sacred precinct and wander through the bustling marketplaces of Tenochtitlan, the city's lifeblood pulses in a different rhythm, one of barter, negotiation, and long-distance ambition. Here, among the cacophony of haggling voices, clattering pottery, and the pungent aroma of exotic foods, we find the Cuauhtlatoque, the elite merchant class whose influence stretched far beyond the city's canals and causeways. These were no ordinary traders. They were spies, diplomats, and cultural conduits, slipping through the fabric of Mesoamerica with silks, cacao, obsidian, and jade, yet also carrying whispers of rebellion, political intrigue, and rumors of far-off empires. Some researchers argue that the Cuauhtlatoque were the unseen architects of Aztec power, their caravans mapping the contours of both wealth and knowledge, moving silently through hostile lands, carefully cultivating alliances and extracting secrets. Imagine them traveling at dawn, canoes gliding over shimmering lake surfaces, laden with bundles of obsidian blades that glint like captured lightning, their cloaks rustling softly in the wind. Each step measured, each gesture calculated. In the markets, the Cuauhtlatoque operated under strict codes, their guilds enforcing rules as rigid as the emperor's edicts, ensuring loyalty and secrecy, punishing deceit with swift, often brutal measures. They were the lifeline connecting the heart of the empire with distant provinces, delivering not just goods, but cultural and religious messages, reinforcing the presence of Tenochtitlan in every corner of the Aztec world. Their wealth and status allowed them to command respect from both nobles and commoners alike, walking the thin line between privilege and danger, as their knowledge of distant territories could elevate them to great power or mark them for execution if they faltered. And yet, behind the apparent order and prosperity, the Cuauhtlatoque carried an undercurrent of tension and uncertainty. Each journey into unknown territories risked ambush, disease, or betrayal. A constant reminder that commerce and empire were inseparable from danger, from one mystery to the next. The Cuauhtlatoque exemplify how the Aztecs wove a network of influence as intricate as the Chinampa gardens that fed their city. They remind us that empire is not built solely on swords and sacrifice, but also on cunning, foresight, and the courage to step into the unknown. And so, as the sun sets over Tenochtitlan, casting long shadows over the marketplaces, one might ask, how much of the empire's power rested in the hands of those who never fought in battle yet controlled the flow of wealth, information, and ambition? What secrets traveled silently along the canoes and roads that kept the Aztec world turning? Now, we turn our gaze toward the apex of Aztec authority, the Tlatoani, whose voice was law and whose presence commanded the devotion of thousands. Yet power in Tenochtitlan was never absolute, for it existed in a delicate balance between divine sanction, noble support, and the ever-watchful eyes of both the people and the empire's allies. The Tlatoani, often draped in finely woven garments that shimmered like the surface of Lake Texcoco at sunrise, was the living embodiment of the city-state's ideals, a conduit between mortals and gods, expected to interpret omens, lead warriors, and ensure the favor of deities whose appetite for blood was insatiable. Some scholars suggest that the authority of the Tlatoani was both ceremonial and pragmatic, while they were symbols of religious and political cohesion. Much of the real governance relied on a network of advisors, priests, and military captains who monitored trade, tribute, and the loyalty of subordinate city-states. Imagine the great palace, its walls adorned with intricate carvings and paintings depicting the exploits of past rulers, echoing with the soft murmur of attendants and the occasional clang of ceremonial instruments. Within these halls, strategies were whispered, alliances forged, and decisions made that could ripple across hundreds of miles of empire, affecting the lives of tens of thousands. Yet with this power came scrutiny. Every gesture, every decree, every ritual, failure, or misstep could be seen as an affront to the gods or a weakness to rivals. The succession of the Tlatoani was equally charged with tension. Nobles debated lineage, merit, and divine favor, ensuring that the chosen ruler carried the legitimacy necessary to quell unrest and maintain the empire's delicate web of control. Some researchers believe that this constant negotiation between authority and legitimacy created a system both resilient and fragile, where the Tlatoani's charisma and intelligence were as vital as military might. As we consider the Tlatoani in his court, we are reminded that Aztec power was never solitary. It was entwined with the expectations of gods, the ambitions of nobles, and the obedience of commoners. And yet, beyond the grandeur and ceremony, the Tlatoani faced an existential question. How much of his authority was real, and how much merely a reflection of the empire's need for order, faith, and fear? In this tension between perception and power lies one of the great enigmas of Aztec governance, a question that lingers like the incense smoke curling from the Templo Mayor, inviting us to ponder what truly sustained an empire where gods demanded blood, and men walked the narrow path between reverence and revolt. From the shadowed halls of power, we move to the bustling heart of the Aztec world, the markets of Cuauhtlatoque, where the rhythm of life and empire converged in a symphony of color, sound, and scent. Picture a vast square stretching over hundreds of meters, thronged with tens of thousands of people, a sea of humanity moving with purpose and urgency. vendors calling out the day's wares in high-pitched melodic voices. The aroma of roasted maize and spicy chilies mingled with the scent of fresh flowers, fish, and exotic herbs, while the clink of obsidian tools, the rattle of pottery, and the flutter of woven textiles created a constant, living soundtrack of trade. Here, the pochtaker, the long-distance merchant elite, moved like shadows among the crowd, bringing goods from distant lands, jade from the highlands, turquoise from the deserts, cacao from the humid lowlands, and, with each exotic item, a story of conquest, negotiation, and perilous travel. Some researchers suggest that the markets functioned not merely as centers of commerce, but as instruments of imperial control, a tangible demonstration of wealth, reach, and social order, where tribute from conquered provinces was displayed, counted, and redistributed in ways that reinforced loyalty and hierarchy. Imagine the daily ritual of tax collection, where envoys from subordinate city-states presented their offerings, cloth, food, and precious stones before nobles and Tlatoani, a spectacle that impressed upon the populace both the might of Tenochtitlan and the omnipresence of divine and human authority. Within this organized chaos, commoners negotiated. Artisans displayed their skill, and priests occasionally appeared, offering blessings or omens, reminding everyone that commerce and devotion were inseparable in Aztec thought. Yet the market was also a space of tension, where theft, deceit, and rivalry tested social norms and authority, and where the line between prosperity and survival was often razor-thin. The structure of the market itself, with designated stalls, supervisors, and guilds, reflected a sophisticated understanding of logistics, economics, and social cohesion, making Cuauhtlatoque not just a center of trade, but a microcosm of the empire itself. As we step back from the crowded aisles, imagining the tide of humanity flowing past stalls of maize, obsidian, and cloth, we sense the pulse of an empire sustained by both material wealth and the intricate web of obligation, loyalty, and fear. And yet, lurking beneath this vibrant surface, one might ask, how much of this spectacle was real power, and how much an illusion carefully crafted to keep gods, nobles, and commoners aligned in a society built upon tribute, ceremony, and the ever-present thirst for blood. As we leave the bustling markets of Cuauhtlatoque, we turn to the chilling heartbeat of Aztec civilization, the ritual of blood and sacrifice, a practice as awe-inspiring as it is terrifying, and one that permeated every layer of society. Sit back, relax, and imagine the Templo Mayor rising above the city, its twin shrines catching the first light of dawn, the air thick with smoke from burning coke, mingling with the coppery scent of life's essence spilled upon stone. Here, priests moved with deliberate precision, their robes rustling, their obsidian blades catching the light, while victims or captives, slaves, or chosen nobles were led to the summit, their fate intertwined with the survival of the world as the Mexica understood it. Some researchers believe that these sacrifices were not merely religious acts, but deeply political instruments, a way to reaffirm social hierarchies and control populations through both terror and awe. Others suggest that sacrifice acted as a cosmic negotiation, a means to repay the gods for the sun's daily rise, the rains that nourished maize, and the fertility of the earth, a perpetual reminder that life was fragile and dependent on divine favor. The spectacle itself was designed to impress and intimidate, a communal performance where the entire city, from nobles to artisans, bore witness. Imagine the priest gripping the chest of a trembling victim, the heartbeat pounding like a drum in the plaza below, the crowd murmuring in unison. The victim's final breath a potent offering to Cuauhtlatoque, the god of war and sun, while Tlaloc, the rain deity, demanded tears and water. Some scholars suggest that the ritualized spilling of blood reinforced the Aztec ideology of reciprocity. The people gave to the gods, and the gods sustained the cosmos. Yet this exchange was never neutral, never free from tension or fear. Each act of sacrifice was both a culmination and a beginning, a moment of ultimate surrender that rippled through political, social, and religious life. Even the nobility, the Pilton, participated in ways that reinforced their status, demonstrating bravery, piety, and loyalty. And yet, as we watch this dark theater of devotion unfold in our minds, one cannot help but wonder, was it the gods who demanded blood, or the empire itself, weaving fear and awe into a system that kept both subjects and conquerors bound to its rhythm, ensuring that the Aztec world, for all its beauty and ingenuity, remained perpetually poised on the knife's edge between life and death. As we reach the final chapter of this journey, let us drift across the waters of Lake Texcoco one last time, imagining the rise and fall of an empire whose echoes still haunt the modern streets of Mexico City. Picture the Templo Mayor, once vibrant with color and sound, now silent, buried beneath layers of stone and memory, its stones whispering secrets of power, devotion, and violence. The Aztec Empire, at its height, was a world of contrasts, sprawling urban centers teeming with merchants, artisans, and warriors. Yet under the shadow of ritual sacrifice and the ever-watchful eyes of gods demanding tribute in blood and obedience, some researchers argue that what makes the Aztec story so compelling is not just their military might or architectural genius, but the way they wove spirituality into every thread of daily life, turning farming, craft, trade, and warfare into acts of devotion, a constant negotiation with unseen forces that could nurture or destroy. Others suggest that the empire's downfall was inevitable, a collision between ambition, disease, and the arrival of outsiders whose hunger for gold and dominion could not be tempered by reverence or respect. Even centuries later, the story remains fragmented, preserved in codices, artifacts, and the layered soil of the Valley of Mexico, but always incomplete, leaving us to question the truth behind the tales of Moctezuma and the countless warriors whose names have been lost to time. The grandeur of Tenochtitlan, with its canals, aqueducts, and chinampas, was a testament to human ingenuity, yet it was also a stage for human sacrifice, a duality that fascinates and unsettles in equal measure. And as we consider the legacy of the puppet rulers installed by the Spanish, we see the tension between survival and sovereignty, between imposed authority and the remnants of dynastic power, a delicate balance that would shape the identity of the Nahua people for generations. Today, Mexico's modern streets overlay ancient temples, marketplaces, and palaces, yet the essence of the Aztec Empire persists in the myths, the language, the crafts, and the rituals that echo faintly in festivals, in stories, in the very fabric of cultural memory. Some suggest that by studying the Aztecs, we glimpse a civilization that understood the fragility of life, the necessity of reciprocity, and the constant presence of forces greater than ourselves. Others see in their rise and fall a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most sophisticated societies can be swept away by conquest, disease, and the inexorable passage of time. And so, as our journey through the empire of the gods comes to a close, we are left with questions as vivid as the pyramids themselves. What truly drove the Aztecs to such heights? And what shadows of their world still linger, unseen, in the bustling streets of modern Mexico City? The mystery of the Aztec Empire, with its gods, warriors, and blood-soaked rituals, remains, forever inviting us to look closer, to wonder deeper, and to remember that history is never fully told, only glimpsed through fragments, whispers, and the haunting pulse of what once was.